Hi everybody. I want to talk about how being an adult child of a narcissist and the behavior that we have experienced growing up turns into painful loneliness as a child and as an adult, and give you some pointers and resources about dealing with that. First of all, an adult child or a child of a narcissist, of course, lacks emotional support. Narcissists are not supportive. Why are they not supportive? Because they're thinking about themselves. And they may be abusive, they may be mean, critical, moody, thinking of their image, all of those things, which makes for nurturance just not happen. And so as a result, the children grow up with a very little self-esteem and have very little emotional resilience. We're not very resilient when we come to, I didn't say we weren't strong, I'm just saying emotionally resilient. And there's a difference. I think ACONs are very strong people. They just struggle with what happens from the neck on down, the inside of them. And also, we are concerned about having had created in us, as a result of this lack of emotional support, unworthiness. Well, if you add a lack of emotional resilience, an unhealthy sense of self, and unworthiness, that's going to make for quite a bit of loneliness for us as children and as adults. Second of all, invisibility and neglect. In narcissistic families, children are invisible and neglected. There may be golden children, there may be mascots, there may be unseen or invisible kids, lost child. There are all kinds of roles, of course, in narcissistic families, but there is still invisibility and neglect for the inner real child, the inner real person. They're treated as they are a role. And so we don't get that very strong being seen and also being nurtured. And what happens? We become invisible and unimportant. And then what happens? We feel lonely. Number 3 is emotional manipulation. If you are being emotionally manipulated, which so often narcissists will do to everyone in the family, because everyone must behave in a certain way to be accepted, or at least conditionally accepted by the narcissist. And I do use the word conditionally because it can always be pulled at any moment. And it's not based on the relationship, it's based on performance. So it's not I accept you because I love you. I accept you because you're doing what I want you to do right now, and you're behaving the way I want you to behave for me. Now I will give you a little acceptance. So with this emotional manipulation, we end up having lots of self-doubt. And if you have self-doubt, a lot of self-doubt, and I remember having tons of self-doubt, how are you going to connect with other people? How are you not going to feel lonely? And I remember so many times, even when I was in a position of leadership and people were wanting to be friends with me or wanting to be close with me, I couldn't do it because I had too much self-doubt. And I had to keep that image going. And that self-doubt just keeps me locked up in a prison of loneliness. Then, of course, narcissistic families or parents will also have a problem with lack of boundaries. Boundaries are just trampled on. Boundaries are not taught. Boundaries are not respected. And so, if we don't have that going on in the family, guess what I'm going to feel as a kid? Autonomy isn't going to be taught, and individuality isn't going to be taught, and self-differentiation isn't going to be taught or valued. None of these things are going to be valued. And when you don't have autonomy, individuality, or some self-differentiation, you may have a lot of people around you. You may have an audience. You may have some friendships, but oftentimes we still have a profound loneliness. One of the things I want to stop here and mention real quick, down in the description below, check out the online program, Your New Road to Self. that's a program I have available for you, and there are some perks that go along with that. Second of all, there's a training that's totally free. You can sign up for it, 84 minutes, building the self you were never allowed to have. Both of these programs would help you in overcoming these things that I'm talking about and also reducing that feeling of loneliness, which is very powerful and painful. I don't know if you remember Phyllis Diller. If some of you are my age, you might remember who she is. She was a comedian, and she also was a concert pianist. And I won a position to be able to be an opening act for her when she performed. And there were a lot of people there. She was pretty well known at the time. She had her own TV show and things like that. Again, I wasn't a celebrity. She was. And I remember sitting up in the audience with her mother, and I didn't know it was her mother, but her mother was mouthing all of her jokes with her. I thought, how does she know all these things? And then found out it was her mother. And even in the midst of all of that sort of celebrity, feeling very lonely, feeling very isolated, that even with all of those good vibes, I couldn't kick this feeling of loneliness. When it should have been a great day of success and joy, and I was able to sing and perform and such before celebrity did come on. And so, again, being in a large position, large crowd, having lots of people doesn't mean you're not going to feel lonely. Loneliness is that ache that we feel about not being connected to other people in a real way. And a lack of boundaries growing up, again, destroys that autonomy, individuality, and self-differentiation. Number 5, role reversal. So many times in narcissistic homes, there are role reversals where the child becomes the caretaker. The child gets parentified. What's going to happen if you become a parentified or caretaking child? Does that set you up for having age-appropriate friendships and relationships? No, it harms that, is actually what it does. And so we may have trouble developing relationships that are age-appropriate with peers and connecting with others on a deeper level, because we're spending all this time being an adult for an adult. And so, again, loneliness occurs. We're not free to have those kind of relationships. Number 6, fear of abandonment. Narcissistic parents may actively discourage or undermine their children's relationships. In other words, if you go off and go have good relationships with other kids or your aunt or your cousins, then I feel jealous, and then there's a fear of abandonment. I may withdraw from you to get you back in line. And so I'm pulling you by our fear of abandonment to not make those connections and soothe that loneliness. And so we end up being reluctant to express our feelings and to seek connections. I don't know how many adults, including myself, I remember doing a whole workshop on friendship for singles, just doing friendship. And I realized how much I didn't know about relationships. And just having friendships, not even a partner, not even a wife or a spouse, a lot of information out there like on that. But how do you be a friend? How do you do that? I didn't know, and began to learn more about that so I could seek connection with other people. But it was very painful, and the loneliness is very painful. 7, isolation from supportive relationships. If you're in a narcissistic family, have narcissistic parents, then they're going to want to keep you close to the nest. Don't be getting into a relationship. In other words, narcissistic parents do not like to share influence. So they don't want you to form those relationships with maybe healthier extended family members or neighbors or friends, schoolmates. And they will even, kind of threaten, not even necessarily in words, but you'll notice they'll start to withdraw from you if you do that. They'll often discourage Well, they're not our family. They don't understand us. They're bad people, when really they're not bad people. But to the narcissist, they're bad people because they would expose the narcissist. So then they're bad. I've even known of people where when the kids started they were going to a church, when the kids started getting close to other kids and the pastor, and it was such a positive influence, the family left because the narcissistic parents could not deal with that. They needed to keep their children isolated, and this wasn't an isolated type of church. And they would just go because they can't have that. 8. Internalization of narcissistic traits. Children raised in narcissistic families might internalize some of the narcissistic behaviors and attitudes that they witness because it's just so modeled in that way. This can lead to difficulties in forming genuine, fulfilling relationships, as these traits can hinder, emotional intimacy. Let's say they're a child of a narcissist, but they're an adult, they're in a relationship, but because of what they saw and believed and were taught, they're going, I'm the head of the house, I'm the man, and you need to be submissive to me because that's what the Bible says. Does that hurt intimacy? And again, we can talk about the whole theology of that whole, and I'm not really here to talk about all the verses I'm just saying how the Bible is used. Because the Bible can be quoted by anybody, and I believe from my pastoral training, even from Satan, even by Satan himself. So the Bible can be quoted for any number of things. But we're in that narcissistic learned behavior, then they use that as kind of but it's about me. So you need to be submissive, wife, because I'm the head of the house. That's kind of a narcissistic kind of use of the Bible because they saw that growing up. Whereas after they have more recovery, then that's not as much of an issue for them. Number 9, narcissists demand the spotlight from children. What does that do? When the narcissist demands to be in the spotlight from their children, then the children don't learn to self-soothe. And if you don't know how to self-soothe, guess what's going to happen? You're going to feel a lot of loneliness if you cannot self-soothe. Narcissistic parents or families don't teach kids how to self-soothe. That's just not a part of the package. And if you don't learn how to self-soothe, and I think this is where a lot of times even couples who are raising small children, even like toddlers, well, we even do it for infants. There are times, healthily, we may let them cry a little bit so they can learn some self-soothing. So I'm not jumping in there and being a helicopter parent. The same is true for a toddler. Sometimes toddlers need to just be upset until they can decide to soothe themselves and go, oh, well, I'm now no longer upset. Mom and Dad have left me with this sitter. I see this truck I'm going to go play with. That's self-soothing. And we must learn that as we grow up because it's going to make us healthier when we get older. And again, I'm not saying don't nurture kids, don't take care of kids. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm saying be careful about the swing of the pendulum and being a parent who never lets their child cry ever about anything. A parent who always is extremely soothing. If you're extremely anything, it's probably problematic. Because life is about balance. That's what true life and human existence is about. It's about balance, to be healthy. Just like in how the body functions. If the body functioning, the labs, I've just had some medical things, labs and things. If they're extreme, then we got some problems. Too low, too high. We want it in the normal range. And that's what we want in our relationships with others. So again, if we don't learn self-soothing, then we're going to be hurting with regard to loneliness. I have some videos on loneliness and the difference between loneliness and aloneness. I think a lot of these things are addressed in my online program. I hope you'll take a look at that. Please subscribe, please like, and please comment. And I want to thank you for watching. Have a good day and be wise.